friends. Welcome to my channel. I am JC Berne, author of Blissful Ascending and several other books, one of which I should be editing right now, but instead I'm making this video because I procrastinate. It's one of many of my character flaws. I'm clearly well written. I have lots of flaws. And this is Book Burning, a show where I talk about books and comics and movies, but I promise to never ever burn a book. Literally or metaphorically, which we'll talk about in this video. So the topic for today's video came about because I have a terrible habit. I have many terrible habits. One of them is I compulsively read and check reviews and ratings for my own books. So if you write a review, if you rate my book on Amazon or on Goodreads or any other venue that I use or know about, I'm going to look at it. I know from day to day if I've gotten a new rating, good or bad. I'm aware of it almost immediately. I read every review. I think about them. I sweat about them. And by the way, I'm not saying this is a positive. This is a negative thing. This is a terrible habit. And if you are a writer, do not do this. It's bad. It's not good for your mental health because, well, a variety of reasons. I'm not going into that today. But you ask any writer, this is not a good way to live your life, but I do it because I'm weak. So I read a few reviews. I had a few review rating situations recently that kind of ticked me off for reasons I'll get into. Don't feel bad for me. It's okay. I'm a grown up. I can handle it. But it made me think about ratings and reviews and about how thoughts people have about ratings and reviews and about some questions people have raised about ratings and reviews. And I thought I could lend some framework or theory around what ratings and reviews are for, how to do them, to sort of help people, both who are looking at ratings and reviews and people who are making ratings and reviews, to do a better job, or to think about it maybe a little bit differently, maybe give them a different perspective on what the process is and should be. So I'm going to start with one foundational sort of principle for ratings and reviews. And that is, what is the purpose of a rating? What is the purpose of Goodreads? What is the purpose of the ratings and reviews on Amazon? What's it for? And I think unequivocally, the answer is ratings and reviews exist to help readers make better reading choices. And by better, I really do mean better for them. I'm not talking about everyone should be reading great literature and ratings and reviews should point everyone towards that. I think that's a bad model of reading and of books and of life. But different readers like different sorts of books. We know that there's no doubt about that. Among your peers, I guarantee among the people you know who read, there are some whose favorite books are the least favorites of others, and types of, I'm sure you know someone who reads romance novels would never pick up like a fantasy, and vice versa. That is normal and appropriate human behavior. We all have different things we like. We like different kinds of music, we like different kinds of movies, we like different kinds of books. Ratings and reviews are there to help people make better reading choices. Because if you can read books that are better for you, that you enjoy, where you have a better reading experience, and that could be you enjoy it more, it could be you find it more fun, it could be it made you cry when that is what you wanted at that time. Whatever it is that you need from a book, whatever it is that you want from a reading experience, ratings and reviews should help you find the books that get you there. It can help you find books to read, find books to not read, find books to prioritize, or find books to prioritize from a financial sense. You know, maybe a review rating can help you. So this book, I was thinking about reading it this year, but now I'm going to read it this weekend because this is really the thing I need right now. Or I kind of wanted this book, but based on this rating or review, now I understand it's not really worth $15 to me. Or it definitely is worth $15 to me. This is what I mean by helping you make good choices. So when you look at Goodreads, Goodreads is just a review and rating site. That is its primary purpose. So what does that mean? That means when we look at a review, so that's what ratings and reviews are for. The second thing I want to sort of lay down as a foundation for what I'm going to talk about is I want to clarify the language around ratings and reviews because it's a little bit ambiguous. What I mean is, when we say something got a good review, we sometimes mean one of two very different things when we say that. So what is a good review? People sometimes mean by that a review that says the thing it's reviewing was good. So someone says, man, that was the best movie I've ever seen. That's a good review. That review says the thing was good. And someone says, man, that was a terrible movie. Someone might say, well, if that's a bad review, that review says the movie was bad. Movie, book, it's the same concept. But sometimes when they hear a good review, what they mean is that review really helped me understand the values and qualities that person found in that book. That review was good. The review helped me know whether or not the book was good. So the term good review and bad review is ambiguous. I'm not criticizing anybody. That's how the words are really used. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to try to avoid that. So I'm going to try to say a review is positive when the review says the thing it's reviewing was good. So a positive review would be something like, that book was great. That movie was great. I loved it. A negative review says that thing was not good. That says the movie, that book was terrible, DNF'd, couldn't finish it, don't read it. That's a negative review. The review is saying a negative thing about the book. And when I say a good or a bad review, I mean, did the review serve its purpose? What's its purpose? Its purpose is to help you or any reader figure out, should I read this book? So in that sense, a review can be bad if it doesn't really help you. So if the person just writes, book was terrible, DNF. DNF means did not finish, or do not finish. Terrible, did not finish. That's the whole review. That might not really, unless you know the person who wrote it, right? That doesn't really tell you much. Like, what was bad? Was the book just have a genre the person didn't like? Did they have kind of, what was the problem? Is it a reason for me to not want it? Or is the fact that this other person didn't finish it actually mean I should read it? I can't tell from that. That review doesn't give me enough information. In that sense, it's a bad review. It's a bad review because it doesn't serve its purpose. What's a good review? A good review serves the purpose of telling you whether you should read it or not. And it doesn't have to be really long. Long often helps, right? Longer, more information. But really, if it's something sort of says, very similar, like if a review just says something sort of very similar to Harry Potter. Okay. Harry Potter is such I keep bringing up Harry Potter as an example, and I'm not trying to defend J.K. Rowling. It's just that if you're of a certain age and you like fantasy and science fiction, you've read Harry Potter. So it's a good touchstone as an example, because everyone's read it. Not everyone, but you know what I mean. So if someone says, very similar, feel and vibes to Harry Potter with slightly older characters, something like that, that will give you a pretty good idea if that's a book for you. Not conclusive, right? That's one sentence, right? But that's a good start to helping you as a reader go, oh, not everyone is going to be helped by this. Some people haven't read Harry Potter. Some people don't know anything about it. That's hard to imagine, but maybe. And that's not the only way to make a good review. It's not always by a comparison. A good review, in my sense, good meaning useful review, might just say something like, this book has scenes of graphic sex scenes. Right, and the reviewer might say, which I loved, and which would make that a positive review, or the reviewer might say, which turned me off, because I don't like graphic sex scenes, right? The reviewer, which would mean a negative review, but that could be a really good review, because as a reader, you probably have, maybe not, but you very likely, or very possibly have a preference. Do you like graphic sex scenes in your books or not? And either way is fine. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but if you know I really like explicit sex scenes in what I read, then that would help you understand that this is something you should probably want to read more. And if you really dislike that, you would know you'd want to read it less. If a review says this is really character driven, this is really plot driven, the review just gives you a really explicit notion of the genre. This is it's a hard science fiction story. Oh, this is a space opera with lots of magical elements. It's really a science fantasy, almost like Star Wars. Information like that really helps readers. So those make all of those good reviews, whether or not they're saying the book was good. It's a good review. But again, a bad review is something like, book was terrible, did not finish. My favorite book ever. And I'll add a caveat. And the caveat is, when you get a review like that from someone you know, or even from a booktuber you follow, it's not as useless as it is from a stranger. If your best friend says, I love this book, that tells you a lot. There's a lot of information conveyed with that because they're your best friend. You know what kind of books they like. You know what they look for. You know what turns them on and off in terms of reading experiences. That could convey a ton. I follow a bunch of booktubers who review books regularly. If any of them say loved it, hated it, I get a ton of information from that. I have for many of them, not all, some reviewers have really broad tastes, but for a lot of them, honestly, that's enough for me to know if it's something, if it's a property I should pursue, because I know our tastes align or our tastes don't align. But if it's a stranger and they say hated it, period, that's useless to me. It's useless to anybody to hear that from a stranger, or loved it, favorite book ever. Kind of useless, also. So, what do you want from a review? And when I think the first thing that you need to get is like, what was the book trying to be? And I was thinking of a couple of examples of this, and come from the indie community, a couple books that have come up that have had some contentious reviews. The first is lovely guy. I'm Twitter friends with him. I've interacted with him on Discord a little bit. John Palladino wrote a book called The Trials of Ashmount. Trials of Ashmount, I haven't read it. From everything I've heard, it's an excellent book. I've heard glowing recommendations of it, but it's quite grim. It's considered a grimdark. Some people say it's the grimmiest of grimdarks, and we can get into a whole argument whether that's true, but it's gritty. Main characters die. Many of the major characters, from what I understand, are sort of morally gray. They're not, shining, stalwart examples of human morality. They're more realistic or grounded, and it's somewhat violent. And there's some violence in there that is triggering enough that certain people DNF'd that one scene. I don't even know what the scene had. But it's a grim, dark book. And again, from everything I've heard, it's excellent. It's not typically the kind of book it's on my TBR, it's on my Kindle right now, I bought it. But it's not typically the kind of book that I prioritize reading, because it's not the kind of book I particularly like to read. But many people, maybe even most people, many people love that kind of stuff, and I've heard only good things. So that's one book. And again, that has gotten reviews where people said things like, DNF'd at this scene because this happened. And that's a negative review. They're saying they didn't like the book, they couldn't even read it. And they're saying why, with some detail, more. It's hard sometimes to balance. You don't want to give spoilers, but you want to warn readers that certain things might be happening that might trigger you and upset you. A second book that I was thinking of is The Crew by Sudhir Samir, friend of mine, lovely guy. And it's also a fantasy, right? But very different tone. The Crew is really funny. The Crew is almost silly, slapstick funny in places. A lot of the characters are kind of deliberately written as over the top, almost caricatures of themselves, almost side characters, really, so that they do these hilarious things that aren't really realistic. If you read it with like an eye towards real life, okay, this person in this situation would run. They wouldn't just, this tough grandma wouldn't just stand up in front of an army. That's not exactly what happens in the book, but things like that. If you've ever read One Piece, the manga, or watched the anime, some very similar tone, right? A lot of the characters have over-the-top, exaggerated personalities for the sake of humor. And it's clearly not that Sudhir doesn't know how people work. He really does. It's that he deliberately overwrites many of the characters and many of the situations for comedic effect. Again, deliberately. It's been described as Deadpool-like. I think of it as One Piece in tone. Not the same story. Great book, totally different from Trials of Ashmount. Right? If you're looking for a laugh and you read Trials of Ashmount, I'm pretty sure for the most part it's not gonna work for you. But if you're looking for a gritty, realistic thing that for which you can get sort of a cathartic experience after having some negative feelings of your own, The Crew's probably not going to work for you. It's a little goofy, and if you're looking for grit and catharsis, you're probably not going to get it. And that's not a criticism of either book. It's saying for different readers, or the same reader at different times, you're going to want one or the other. And what happens is, a review needs to convey to the reader which of these books they're reading. And those aren't the only two choices. I'll give you a third example of my own book, Return of the Griffin. Return of the Griffin is pretty consistently my lowest rated book of the three in the Hybrid Helix. Very possibly that in some objective way it's not as good as the other two. I'm not going to argue that. I suspect that's actually true, but that's not the point. There's some political stuff in there because the first book takes place out in space. Second book, Return of the Griffin, is the only book so far where they really come back and spend time on Earth. And on Earth, I have a couple plot lines that upset certain people. So one plot line is I've got a team, a small subplot where there are bad guys, villains, a villainous group, and they are the Proud Guys. And if you know anything about American politics, you're like, that sounds familiar. And the Proud Guys are a group of neo-Nazi people who are villains, and they are a caricature. They are almost. I'm making fun of the Proud Boys, who are an American neo-fascist white supremacist political group, political terrorists who operate in this country, who came to fame during a recent presidential election. And in the book, I clearly and savagely mock them, because that's what they're for. That's why we have Nazis in America, so we can make fun of them. They serve no other purpose. They're certainly not useful in any way. So if you're the kind of person who looks up to the Proud Boys, and you read this, you're probably not going to enjoy it very much. There's a whole plot line where I talk about how alien technology was used to assist with global warming, and that's kind of driving an economic shift all across the world. If you don't think global warming is real, you're not going to have an easy time resonating with the storyline. If you don't believe global warming is real, and if you don't believe, if you think the Proud Boys are like kind of personal heroes of yours, you're probably not going to have a great time with this book. And what's happened is I've had some reviews, some negative reviews of Return of the Griffin, that very specifically said, and one I just read, I thought it was great. He sort of said something like, if you're on that end of the spectrum politically, you're probably going to be insulted by this book. And at first, it bothered me a little bit. I'm like, well, but I realized that's actually a really good, not a positive review, but it's a really good review. The person was complaining. They thought it was a deficit of the books. It was a negative review. But it's really useful to certain readers to hear, oh, I don't think global warming is real. I don't think women or black people should have positions of power. I don't think heroes should be gay, or gay people should be portrayed in heroic light in fiction. If that's your belief system, you're not going to enjoy this book. It's not going to be a good reading experience for you. I'm not naive enough to think you're going to learn anything from it. I don't believe that'll happen. So you shouldn't be reading that book. Go read something else, right? The review was good. It was negative. I think it was still a pretty overall decent rating. But they're clearly unhappy about my politics, which is fine. Go read something else. So it was a good review. A good review. I've seen good reviews of The Crew that sort of said, didn't like it, too much humor for me. That's a negative review, but it's good. It helps readers figure if you're not in the mood for kind of a slightly slapstick storyline, if that's going to turn you, don't read The Crew, right? Read something else. If you are in the mood for a good laugh, if you just put down Terry Pratchett, I'm not saying The Crew's like Terry Pratchett, there's similarities, but if that's the thing you want to move on to next, go read it, right? A good review helps people figure this out. Okay, so I've talked a lot about reviews. I've talked about good and bad reviews, and I've had, both. Obviously, of my books, I've had some really thorough reviews that, touched my heart. That's not really the point. Now, let's talk about ratings a little bit, though. And ratings are complicated because when you look at a book on Amazon, the first thing you see is an average rating. So if you look up Wistful Ascending right now and you go to Amazon, you're going to see something like, Wistful Ascending, 4.7. It's 4.7 out of 5. Ratings are usually out of 5 stars. I don't know why. I don't know why there's 3 Michelin stars for restaurants, but books get 5 stars. Some people rate them out of 10. None of that's important. You get the idea of what a rating is. So the first thing you see is an average. And here's the problem I have with it. There are 2 ways a book can get a good or a bad rating. So someone could pick up The Crew and be looking for grim and gritty, pick it up, get lighthearted and funny, and have a disappointing experience and say 2 stars. That could happen. Or someone could be looking for funny, right? They could be wanting like slapstick humor and just think The Crew wasn't good at doing that and give it. Right? I don't know who that person would be, but it's possible. We can imagine someone picking up a comedic property and just thinking it wasn't funny. And those are really different. The first one is a person is basically saying what this book tried to be wasn't working for me. It wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't what I like. The second person is I wanted this, or I wanted epic fantasy. This just wasn't a good epic fantasy, or this just wasn't a good grimdark novel. Those are really different. But if you give the book a rating, those numbers get averaged in the same way. No one can look at a rating and say, 3.4, that means the book was really funny, or 3.4, that means it was really grim. It doesn't tell you. It only tells you what because it's an average. So if you have a book with really low average rating, it could just mean a lot of people picked up the book who shouldn't have. Maybe that's an indictment on the book's marketing. I'll buy that. I'll buy that if that's going to be your argument. But it doesn't really help a reader. What a reader needs is two things. They need reviews they can read that tell them what kind of book it was. And they need a number that tells them how good the book was at being what it was trying to be. The rating should only say how good the book was at what it was trying to be. If you have a grimy, grimdark novel, the rating should only reflect how skillfully grimdark it was. If the book wasn't funny enough for you or it was too grim for you, that shouldn't detract from the rating. That means that book wasn't for you. What it was trying to be wasn't in line with what you needed. So here's my proposal. Here's my thought about ratings. Reviews, you should always say what it was that you did or didn't like about the book, in as much detail as you're comfortable with. And it could just be a sentence or two. Very similar vibe to Harry Potter. That says a lot about what kind of book it was. The number should only reflect how good the book was at what it was, not whether what it was matched what you wanted. So if you were really looking, like for example, YA. I don't like YA. I didn't love Harry Potter. This was before J.K. Rowling became, started running for Turf of the World. But I just don't like YA. I've never read YA that I really enjoyed. YA, the way the character. I don't really care about teenagers that much. You can say what you want. I've never read a YA I loved. So does that mean really for me as an experience when I read a YA book, I'm never going to enjoy it more than 3.5 or 4 stars worth to me. But that's not the point, because as long as my review says this is kind of YA, and then I should only put a rating down as was this a really good YA book or not. So if it was a really good YA book, it wouldn't really still work for me, but I should give it 5. This is my opinion. I should still be either giving it no rating or give it an appropriate rating for what it was, which might be 5 stars or 4 stars, even if it didn't really work for me. Horror. I could read great horror and I would not enjoy it. I don't like horror. I'm sorry. If you like horror, that's fantastic. I don't. There's no horror book that's going to be a 5-star experience for me. The best horror book in the world. So if I'm going to read a horror book and rate it, I need to rate it as a horror book. Was it good at horror or not? And if I can't figure that out, if I don't like horror enough to make that determination, I shouldn't be rating books. I should just leave my description. This was horror. Be aware. That's actually useful to read. If they just say, I didn't rate this because I don't like horror and this book is horror, that's an incredibly useful review to certain people. But if I then give it 2 stars, that's useless, because that's going to make it seem to a horror fan like the book wasn't as good at horror. But that's not the case. I'm not saying the book was bad horror. I'm saying the book was bad for me. It's inappropriate for me to give that book 2 stars. Which also means that anytime you give a rating without a review, you're doing a disservice to the book and to the reading community. Because if you give anytime you give a bad rating, anytime you give a low rating, you're basically a 2 star. I got a 2 star from some guy read my first book, gave it 4 stars, then he gave books 2 and 3 2 stars. Dude, if you give book 2 stars, stop reading. Do me a favor. But he's allowed to do that. I'm feeling curmudgeonly. But why the 2 stars? What didn't work for you that you gave it 2 stars? No reader can tell because there's no review. And it's very hard to tell, did he give it 2 stars because of the implied politics? Did he give it 2 stars because there's some gay characters? And by the way, my books don't have a ton of gay representation. They don't have a ton of trans representation. That's not what they're about. If you're looking for that specifically as like the overriding theme, I'm not trying to sell my books to you as I'm all about, representation of any group like that. That's not the major thrust. It's sort of like, yeah, there'll be characters who are happy to be gay, and that's just what happens. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not trying to sell this as like, oh, if you're gay, you got to read Wistful Ascending. That's really never was the thrust of my marketing or thought process. Anyway, back to what I was saying. A naked low rating doesn't really tell us anything. It's not helpful unless the person has very specifically said, okay, this is an epic fantasy. I read a ton of epic fantasy, and this was a bad one. That 2 star might be valid, but you should also write that. Now, weirdly, a high rating is kind of more useful, because if someone loved the book, they must have loved it for what it was. It must have done a good job at something, which means that if someone gives it a 5 stars and that and they don't write anything, but someone else writes, there's like, still 200 other reviews people can read. They can read those other reviews and get a sense of what kind of book it was, but your 5 star will help them know that, a sizable number of people really enjoyed it. And that's enough for a reader to make a pretty good choice. So, let's say you're thinking about writing a review. I'm going to say a few things. Your review doesn't have to be incredibly eloquent or touch on every single thematic thread that's running through a book. If you can do that, that's nice, but it doesn't have to, because you have to understand in the context of someone's going to look at this book on Amazon or on Goodreads, they're going to have an array of reviews, they're going to go on blogs, they're going to see lots of choices. You don't have to capture everything that goes on in this book in a review. You don't have to give it an exhaustive summary. That's not necessary. If you want to, I'm not saying you shouldn't, you don't have to. What you need to be able to do is say something that's going to be useful to some readers about whether or not they should read the book and how soon. And that can be as simple as, reminded me of X-Men. Maybe you want to expand on that a little bit, a couple sentences. That's going to be really useful to a lot of readers. If you can say more, that's great. But don't feel that you shouldn't be leaving a review because you're not as eloquent as someone. You don't need to be. You need to say, I love this, I didn't love it, and a little bit of why, and a little bit about the genre. Like, I honestly, like I said before, this book was kind of a horror book. I don't like horror. That's actually a pretty good review. Is it going to help everyone? No, but it's going to help a lot of people make smart decisions, which is your job as a reviewer. So, there's more to be said about reviews probably. As an author, never argue with a review. I'm not really, I guess, addressing this video mostly to other authors. I'm mostly addressing it to people who do reviews. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I will say, if you review my books, I make an effort to, I'll thank you, and I will read it, and I will not argue with you. You can look online. I'm not going to get angry at people or argue with them. If you are sensitized politically in a certain direction, you may want to reconsider reading past Wistful Ascending. I don't know, I thought putting a not white dude on the cover would be enough to give that hint, but apparently I was wrong, and I still attracted readers who were not pleased with me, so that's what happens. But reviewing is super important. Reviewing indie books might be even more important, because I may catch some flack for saying this, but look, lots of indie books are awful. If you just go to Amazon and you scroll for like some kind of search key, some kind of, I want a superhero story, and you just buy at random the first one that shows up or whatever, randomly select a bunch and read them. And I'm not upset. I'm not saying this particular superheroes, any genre, fantasy, superheroes, whatever. And you just read at random. A lot of them are bad, like really, like objectively bad. Reviews help, and if readers keep going, oh, I've read like 10 indie books in a row and they were bad, they're going to stop reading indie books. So as a reader, as a reviewer, you can really help. Review the good ones. I hope mine are among them, but if not, say that. Review them appropriately, whatever you think, and then giving readers the tools to find the good ones, which will keep them reading, which helps everybody. And that's how we can grow. That's how we can free reading and writing from the control of the publishing industry that doesn't really care about us very much. That's how we can all, and let's be honest, leaving good reviews, not positive reviews, not reviews that always say this was great, but reviews that are good, that help people make good choices, makes people's lives better. You are doing I'm Jewish, we say a mitzvah, you're doing a good deed. You are helping other people find the things that will bring them joy, and that is a good thing. That is good in and of itself. And, please write the reviews that help the right people read my books and help the wrong people to not read my books and everyone else's books or whatever books you read. It's super important and it's super useful, and it's a big and important contribution to society. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. You are helping people build communities. You are helping people live better lives. When you rate a book on Amazon, that sounds ridiculous, but I sincerely believe it. So that's all I have to say. So that's what I have to say for this video. This is take 2. The first one I got a little too angry. So you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. So I don't turn green or anything. I just become less coherent. So hopefully this one works better, and I'll put it up there. And please, if you disagree with anything I said, by all means, say something in comments. Disagree, I read every comment because, like I said to you, I read everything, for better or for worse. If you leave reviews, if you're a reviewer, if you have anything to add or subtract, let me know. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.